The return, the rain had just stopped falling, leaving the city washed in a silver glow. The streets were damp, the air heavy, and the faint scent of wet earth filled the night. Sundar Pichai sat alone in the back seat of a quiet car, his face reflected faintly in the window as the driver made a slow turn toward the heart of the city. He had been to thousands of meetings. He had walked into boardrooms where the future of billions was being decided, but nothing had ever made his heart pound the way it did now. Tonight was not about Google, not about Silicon Valley, not about CEOs or technology. Tonight was about something he had long buried under layers of work and responsibility, his past, and the woman who had once been the center of his world. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the memories surface. Her laughter, soft and unguarded, used to fill their tiny apartment back in the days before success had found him. He remembered the late-night conversations, the struggles when they barely had enough to get by, and the way she had believed in him when the world thought he was nothing but a dreamer. But he had also remembered the silence that came later, the unspoken distance that grew as his career demanded more and more of him. She wanted presence, he gave her absence. She wanted simplicity. He gave her the chaos of ambition. Love, no matter how deep, can crumble when two people walk in different directions. In the end, they parted ways not in anger but in silence, an ending that felt more like unfinished business than closure. And now, years later, she was getting married again, to someone else, and Sundar had been invited. He didn't know if it was kindness or cruelty, but he had accepted without hesitation. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was respect, or maybe it was a quiet hope to finally set his heart free. But deep inside he wondered, what could he possibly say at a wedding where the woman once bound to him for life was vowing herself to another man? The car slowed in front of the grand hall, its towering arches glowing golden in the evening light. Laughter spilled out from the open doors, warm and welcoming. Sundar sat still, his hand tightening slightly against his knee. He had been recognized in almost every corner of the world, but tonight he wanted no recognition. He was not the CEO of Google here, not the man of wealth or power. He was just a guest, a former chapter in someone else's life story. Still, he felt the weight of unseen eyes, the whispers that would rise once people noticed him. He exhaled, slowly, and stepped out of the car. Inside, the hall looked like something out of a dream. Chandeliers glistened above the crowd. Tables were adorned with white roses and every corner seemed to glow. Music drifted softly through the air, mixing with the hum of conversations. Sundar walked in quietly, his steps measured, his face composed, but his mind anything but calm. Every detail seemed to press against him, the sound of glasses clinking, the sight of families gathering in joy, the faint smell of perfume carried through the air. This was a night of celebration, yet for him, it was a night of farewell. Then, he saw her. Standing at the far end of the hall, dressed in white, her smile radiant and eyes shimmering with a happiness that made the room glow even brighter. For a moment, Sundar felt his chest tighten, like someone had pressed against an old scar. She looked almost the same as the day he first met her, only now she carried a different kind of light, the calmness of someone who had found peace. Beside her stood the man she would soon call her husband, tall and confident, his hand resting gently over hers. Sundar studied him quietly, searching for something, anything that might tell him who this man was beyond appearances. But what struck him most was not jealousy. It was an unexpected sense of gratitude, because she looked happy. And wasn't that all he had ever wanted for her? As Sundar moved further inside, heads began to turn. Whispers spread like a ripple in water. Some guests smiled in recognition, others simply watched with curiosity. Sundar, however, didn't break his calm expression. He offered polite nods, shook a few hands, but kept his distance from the center of attention. He found a quiet corner near the back, where he could see everything without being seen too much. Yet even there he could feel her eyes searching for him. And when they met, just for a fleeting second, it was as if the room fell silent. No music, no laughter, no whispers. Just two people staring across years of history, carrying words they would never say aloud. The ceremony began. Vows were exchanged, voices trembling with emotion, promises spoken that carried the weight of eternity. Sundar listened, his mind caught between the present and the past. When she said, "I do," a soft ache spread through his chest. But there was no bitterness. Instead, there was acceptance, as if life itself was gently telling him that love sometimes means letting go, even when it hurts. He clapped with everyone else, his applause steady, his smile faint but genuine. After the ceremony, guests mingled, laughter filling the air as old friends reunited and families celebrated. Sundar stayed quiet, sipping from a glass of water, lost in thought. But then, to his surprise, she began walking toward him. Every step she took felt heavy with unspoken history, and when she finally stopped in front of him, the silence was louder than the music around them. "You came," she whispered softly, her voice carrying both warmth and a trace of disbelief. Sundar nodded gently. "I had to. I couldn't miss this." Her eyes glistened, and for a brief moment, the years seemed to disappear. It was just them again, standing side by side like before. But time had changed everything. There were no promises left between them, only respect and memories. Still, in that instant, Sundar realized he had something he wanted to give her, something he had carried all these years, hidden deep within himself. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't power, it wasn't even words. It was something far more personal, something that tied their past to her future. But before he could say anything, before he could reveal the one thing he had brought for her, someone interrupted. Her new husband walked up, smiling politely, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "Thank you for coming," he said to Sundar, his voice respectful, yet firm. Sundar nodded, returning the courtesy with quiet grace. But as their eyes met, Sundar felt a sudden shift, something subtle yet undeniable. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes, and in that moment Sundar understood. This night might not be as simple as a farewell, and as he reached into his pocket, feeling the small object he had carried all this way, he knew that whatever happened next would not just close a chapter. It would open one that no one in this hall was prepared for. The unspoken gift. The air inside the grand hall grew heavier after that brief exchange, though no one else seemed to notice. Laughter rolled across the room, glasses clinked in celebration, and the music carried on with its cheerful rhythm. But for Sundar, time slowed. He could feel the cool edges of the small object in his pocket, pressing against his palm as though it was demanding to be revealed. His heart battled between silence and expression. This wasn't just a gift. It was a memory wrapped in meaning, a piece of their shared past he had preserved through years of distance and change. He glanced at her again. Her smile remained soft and radiant as she stood beside her new husband. Yet beneath that smile, Sundar thought he caught something. A flicker of unease, a shadow that passed too quickly to be certain. She avoided his eyes after that, focusing, instead on the guests congratulating her, thanking her, embracing her. Sundar stayed where he was, observing quietly, like a man watching life unfold from behind an invisible glass wall. When the speeches began, the hall grew quiet. Friends and family shared their stories, their voices trembling with affection and nostalgia. Her father spoke of her childhood, how she had always been the one to hold the family together with her kindness and patience. Her best friend spoke of the nights they had stayed awake dreaming about the future, a future that now seemed to stand right in front of them, dressed in a wedding gown. Laughter broke through tears as anecdotes turned to humor, but Sundar's heart remained heavy. Each word reminded him of the years he had once shared with her, the years he had walked away from, choosing ambition over simplicity. And then, to his shock, her voice rose above the murmurs. "I'd like to say something," she said, standing with grace. All eyes turned toward her, including his. She held the microphone with steady hands, but her eyes flickered across the crowd until, just for a second, they landed on Sundar. "Tonight is not just a celebration of love," she began, her tone warm and measured. "It is also about gratitude, gratitude for the people who shaped us, who stood by us and who reminded us of who we were when we forgot ourselves. She paused, her voice trembling ever so slightly. And for me, that includes someone here tonight who once walked with me through the hardest years of my life. Someone who taught me resilience, who taught me patience, and who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. The hall turned in unison, following her gaze, and suddenly all eyes were on Sundar. He sat frozen, his chest tightening as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He hadn't expected this, not here, not now. He saw respect in her eyes, but also something deeper, something unspoken that the words couldn't fully capture. I would not be who I am today without that chapter, she continued softly. And though life took us in different directions, I want to say thank you. Tonight, as I begin this new journey, I do so carrying lessons that came from that part of my life. And I am grateful. The hall erupted in applause, warm and genuine, but Sundar remained still. His eyes locked on hers. She had given him acknowledgement, closure even, in front of everyone. But instead of easing the ache in his chest, it deepened it. He wondered if the gift in his pocket was even necessary now, or if giving it would only complicate the fragile peace she had found. Later, when the crowd loosened and the music resumed, Sundar stepped outside for air. The night was cool. The sky painted with fading clouds and the faint scent of rain still lingered. He stood under the canopy, listening to the distant laughter spilling from the hall. He thought of slipping away quietly, leaving her with his silent blessings and walking back into the world that demanded him. Yet something held him there, rooted to the ground. That was when he felt a presence beside him. She had followed him, out, her dress brushing softly against the stone floor as she stood under the same canopy. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was heavier than words could bear. Finally she whispered, "You kept something, didn't you?" Sundar turned, startled. Her eyes searched his face as if she already knew. Slowly he nodded and reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed against the worn edges of the item, a small velvet box that had traveled with him across continents, through countless years. He held it in his hand but didn't open it yet. "This was meant for you," he said quietly. "I carried it long after we parted. I told myself I would give it back when the time was right. Maybe that time never came. But tonight, maybe it has." Her breath caught, her eyes flickering between the box and his face. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing beneath the soft glow of the lights. But just as Sundar began to open the box, a sharp voice cut through the silence. Her new husband had stepped outside, his eyes narrowing, as he took in the scene before him. His jaw tightened, his arm folding across his chest. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone calm but carrying an edge that sliced through the night. The velvet box remained unopened in Sundar's hand, the moment broken. Her expression shifted instantly, torn between past and present, between loyalty and memory. Sundar glanced down at the box, then back at the man standing a few steps away. And in that charged silence, Sundar realized that the gift he had carried for so long was not just a symbol of their past. It was about to become the spark that could change everything about this night. The confrontation, the tension in the night air was almost unbearable, pressing down on all three of them like an invisible weight. Sundar stood frozen with the velvet box in his hand, his fingers tightening around it as though letting go would mean surrendering years of memories. Beside him, she stood with her face pale, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but could not find the words. And just a few feet away, her new husband, tall, composed, but with eyes sharp as glass, watched them both, suspicion and unease flickering behind the calm mask he wore. "What's in your hand?" the husband asked, his tone even but unmistakably firm. His gaze shifted between the box and Sundar's face, as if trying to uncover secrets hidden in silence. Sundar hesitated, his heart caught between the past and the present. The truth seemed too fragile to share here, too heavy to place in a moment already burdened with tension. But before he could answer, she stepped forward, her hand lightly brushing Sundar's arm. "It's nothing," she said softly, her voice gentle but steady. "Just something from a long time ago." Her husband's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press further. Instead, he exhaled slowly, adjusting his jacket with the deliberate calm of a man controlling his temper. "Then maybe it should stay in the past," he said, his words carrying more meaning than they appeared to. Sundar looked at him carefully. There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice, but beneath the calmness, Sundar could sense something darker. It wasn't jealousy alone. It was possession, a quiet demand for dominance, the kind of energy that wanted control over every part of her life. Sundar had seen this look before, not in his own marriage, but in boardrooms, in negotiations, in people who fought desperately to keep power in their hands. It made his chest tighten. "Of course," Sundar replied quietly, sliding the box back into his pocket. He didn't want to cause a scene. Not here, not tonight. But deep inside, a voice whispered that this wasn't over. Her husband gave him a polite nod, then turned to her, his hand pressing firmly against her back as he guided her toward the hall. "Guests are waiting," he said. She gave Sundar one last glance over her shoulder, one filled with questions, with conflict, with emotions she could not express. And then she disappeared back into the glow of the celebration, left alone under the canopy. Sundar closed his eyes. The night air was cool against his skin, but inside he felt restless. The box in his pocket felt heavier than it ever had before. He wanted to believe that giving it to her would bring closure, but now he wasn't sure. Maybe it would open wounds she had already healed. Maybe it would plant doubts in a marriage that had just begun. Or maybe, just maybe, it would protect her from something she hadn't yet seen. He returned to the hall eventually, though his steps were slower, more burdened. He blended into the crowd once more, exchanging polite words with strangers, offering faint smiles when people approached him with admiration. But his mind wasn't in their conversations. His eyes kept drifting toward her, watching the way she laughed with her family, the way her smile lit up the room. Yet every time her husband's hand rested on her shoulder, Sundar noticed the subtle flinch, the quick flicker of unease that no one else seemed to catch. It was small, almost invisible, but Sundar knew her too well to mistake it. Later in the evening, when the dance floor filled with guests and the room pulsed with energy, Sundar slipped away to a quieter corner. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket and opened it slowly. Inside lay a delicate necklace, simple but elegant, with a tiny charm shaped like a key. It was the first gift he had ever given her during their years together. Back when they were young and broke, back when he had saved for months just to buy something that could symbolize his belief in her. She had worn it every day until their separation, and when she left, she had forgotten it on their kitchen table. Sundar had kept it ever since. He stared at it now, the silver glinting faintly in the dim light, and memories flooded back. Her laughter when he first clasped it around her neck, the way she had touched it absent-mindedly when she was nervous, the way it had been more than jewelry, but a reminder that someone believed in her dreams. And now, he wondered, did she still need that reminder? Or had she outgrown it? Before he could decide, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "So, it was you she was talking about." Sundar turned sharply. Her best friend stood there watching him with careful eyes. She had been the one to share stories earlier, the one who knew both their pasts more intimately than anyone else. Her expression was not hostile, but there was something probing in it, a curiosity mixed with concern. She spoke of gratitude, of lessons from someone who believed in her. The friend continued. "We all thought she meant her parents, but the way she looked at you..." She trailed off, shaking her head, slightly. "Does her husband know?" Sundar remained silent, closing the box slowly. "It's not my place to interfere," he said at last. "This is her life now." The friend studied him carefully, then sighed. "Maybe. But sometimes silence can be as dangerous as speaking. Just be careful, Sundar. Not everything here is as it looks." Her words lingered long after she walked away, leaving Sundar staring once more at the necklace in his hand. His chest tightened. He had come tonight for closure, but instead he had walked into something far more complicated. As the night wore on, Sundar noticed more details that unsettled him. The way her laughter dimmed whenever her husband drew near. The way he held her hand a little too tightly. The way his smile seemed polished for the crowd but cold in private. Sundar's instincts, honed over years of reading people in the business world, whispered warnings he could not ignore. And then it happened. As Sundar made his way toward the exit, ready to leave the night behind, he caught sight of them near a side door. Her husband's hand gripped her wrist a little too firmly, his face bent close to hers, his words low but sharp. She nodded quickly, forcing a smile as soon as they re-entered the crowd. No one else noticed, but Sundar did. His steps slowed. The box felt heavier in his pocket once more. The gift he had carried all these years was no longer just a memory. It was becoming something else. A symbol, a choice, maybe even a warning. He had come to say farewell. But now he realized this night might demand far more of him than he had ever planned to give. The shadow beneath the smile, the celebration moved into its final hours, yet the atmosphere remained charged with energy. Music swelled, couples danced, and the laughter of families blended with the clinking of glasses. To the casual eye, it was a perfect night, the kind that would be remembered as flawless in every photo and every story told afterward. But Sundar's eyes were not casual. He had always been a man who noticed details, the hesitation in a voice, the unease behind a smile. And tonight those details were everywhere. He stood near the edge of the dance floor watching her glide through the crowd. Her gown shimmered beneath the golden lights, her smile never wavering as guests congratulated her. But Sundar's attention was fixed not on her public grace, but on the small moments between. The way her husband leaned close, whispering in her ear with an intensity that seemed less like affection and more like control. The way she stiffened, just for an instant, before regaining her composure. The way her laughter, genuine with others, dimmed into something fragile when he was near. Sundar's chest tightened. He had no right to interfere. He reminded himself of this again and again. This was her life now, her choice, her path. Yet every instinct told him that something was wrong, that behind the polished surface of this marriage lay shadows no one wanted to acknowledge. He slipped away from the crowd and found himself in the quiet of a side corridor. The walls were lined with portraits of strangers, old photographs of past events, their frozen smiles echoing the ones inside the hall. Sundar leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He thought of the necklace still resting in the velvet box inside his pocket. It wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of something pure, something fragile, something he had once believed would last forever. And maybe, just maybe, it could mean something again tonight. Not as a token of love, but as a reminder of strength. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. "You're not the kind of man who can watch in silence, are you?" Turned. It was her best friend again, the one who had spoken to him earlier. She stepped closer, her expression sharp, almost protective. "I've known her my whole life," she continued. "She doesn't flinch like that, not unless she feels trapped." Sundar's jaw tightened. "You saw it too." She nodded. "Of course I did. But everyone else is too blinded by the fairy tale to notice. And she won't say anything. Not tonight. Not with all these people here." She hesitated, lowering her voice further. "I don't know what you brought with you, but maybe it's exactly what she needs. A reminder that someone still sees her." Her words struck deep. Sundar glanced toward the hall where the music still played, the laughter still rolled. The world still believed in perfection. And he realized something with clarity. His presence tonight was not an accident. He hadn't come here merely to close a chapter. He had come because in some way fate had decided he needed to. When he returned to the hall, his decision weighed heavily inside him. He moved toward her slowly, waiting until she was alone near a table sipping from a glass of water while her husband spoke to another guest. When she noticed him, her eyes widened slightly, as if she knew already what he intended. "Why did you keep it all these years?" she whispered when he stopped in front of her. Sundar reached into his pocket and carefully placed the small velvet box on the table between them. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. She knew. Her hands trembled slightly as they rested on the edge of the box, her breath catching in her chest. Because it wasn't just about us, he said softly. It was about who you were. Who you still are. I thought maybe one day, if life ever weighed you down, you'd need a reminder. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment her smile faltered. Not the polite smile she had worn all evening, but the real one, fragile and filled with emotion. She pressed her lips together as if to speak, but before the words could form, her husband appeared at her side. His hand came down on the box swiftly, closing it with a snap before she could even touch it. "What's this?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes cold. "A memory," Sundar answered, his tone steady but unyielding. Her husband studied him, the tension in his jaw betraying the calm exterior he was trying to maintain. He slipped the box into his own pocket without asking, without hesitation, as though claiming it by right. "We don't need old memories tonight," he said, his arm tightening around her waist. For the first time all evening, Sundar saw her eyes darken with something that looked dangerously close to fear. She lowered her gaze, nodding quickly as though agreeing was the only choice she had. And in that instant, Sundar knew with absolute certainty. This was no ordinary marriage. Beneath the polished surface, something was deeply wrong. But before he could speak, before he could demand the box back, the music stopped and the room grew quiet. The announcer called for the couple's first dance as husband and wife. All eyes turned toward the center of the hall, and her husband guided her firmly onto the dance floor. She followed, her face composed, her smile painted once more for the crowd. Sundar stood at the edge of the hall, his fists tightening at his sides. He had come to say farewell, but now he understood. Walking away was no longer an option. The first crack, the hall dimmed as the music shifted to a slower rhythm. All eyes turned toward the couple as they took their place in the center of the dance floor. A spotlight followed them, casting a soft glow over her gown and his polished suit. For everyone else, it was a breathtaking sight, a picture-perfect moment that sealed the night in beauty. But Sundar saw what others missed. Her smile, though radiant, did not reach her eyes. Her body, though graceful, moved with the careful stiffness of someone measured in every step, and his grip on her waist was not tender. It was firm, almost possessive, as though reminding her of the invisible chains she now wore. As they moved together, whispers filled the hall. Guests marveled at the beauty, the grace, the love they thought they saw. Phones lifted, cameras flashed, every detail preserved for social media feeds that would declare this union flawless. Sundar stood at the edge, watching not with admiration, but with an ache that gnawed deeper with every passing second. It wasn't jealousy. It was fear. Fear that she had entered into something dangerous, something she might not have the strength to escape. When the dance ended, the crowd erupted. In applause, she curtsied slightly, her face once again perfectly composed, while her husband gave a bow with a polished smile. They returned to their table, surrounded instantly by family and friends, and Sundar felt the weight of helplessness press against his chest. He had seen enough to know that something wasn't right, but what could he do? This was her life now. And yet, a voice deep inside whispered, "You didn't come here just to watch." A little later, Sundar stepped outside again. The air was cooler now, the moon breaking through the clouds to paint the night in silver. He needed the space, needed to breathe away from the noise. But as he leaned against one of the marble columns, he heard voices drifting from the other side of the garden wall. He recognized them instantly, hers and his. "Please, not tonight," her voice whispered, trembling, urgent. "You embarrassed me in there," came his husband's reply, low but sharp. "Mentioning him like that, letting your eyes wander. Do you know how that looks? He's a part of my past," she said softly, her voice cracking. "I only spoke with respect, nothing more." "Respect?" the man hissed. "You still feel something for him. Don't think I didn't see it." There was a pause, and Sundar's chest tightened as he heard the sound of her muffled sob. "Please," "You're hurting me," she whispered. Sundar's hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to step forward to break the silence, to stand between them. But he held back, his mind racing. Barging in would expose her pain in front of the world, stripping her of dignity. He couldn't do that. Not yet. Instead, he stood in the shadows, his heart burning with a quiet resolve. After a few tense minutes, the voices faded, and they returned to the hall as though nothing had happened. She fixed her makeup, straightened her gown, and walked inside with a smile so convincing that no one suspected a thing. Only Sundar knew what it cost her to wear that mask. Back inside, the evening shifted into its final acts. Dessert was served, toasts were raised, and laughter filled the air once more. Sundar forced himself to blend in, nodding politely when guests approached, though his thoughts never left her. He glanced across the room again and again, watching her movements, catching the flickers of exhaustion in her eyes. And then, just as the evening seemed to settle into its final comfort, the unexpected happened. The master of ceremonies announced that before the couple departed, they had arranged a special tradition. Anyone close to them could step forward and share a final blessing or memory. The crowd murmured with delight. Family members rose one by one, offering warm wishes, heartfelt stories, and emotional farewells to the newlyweds. Sundar sat still, debating whether to remain silent. He had already been acknowledged earlier. Perhaps his part was done. But then, as though sensing his hesitation, her eyes found his across the hall. She held his gaze, just for a moment, and in that silent exchange, he felt a plea. Not for romance, not for drama, but for truth, for someone to speak the words she could not. Slowly, almost against his own will, Sundar rose. The hall fell quiet as he walked toward the stage. Whispers began again, spreading like fire through the crowd. Everyone knew who he was. Not just the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, but her former husband, the man whose presence at this wedding was already a puzzle to many. He took the microphone with calm hands, his face composed but his heart thundering. He looked at her first, then at the crowd, and finally back at her husband. And then, in a steady voice, he began to speak. "Life is strange," Sundar said softly, his voice carrying through the silence. "Sometimes it brings people together. Sometimes it pulls them apart. But in both moments there are lessons of love, of sacrifice, of patience." He paused, his eyes returning to her, seeing the faint tremor in her hands. "I stand here tonight not as her past, but as someone who has seen her strength up close. She is kind, resilient, and braver than she even realizes. And my wish for her is simple, that no matter where life takes her from this day forward, she never forgets her own worth." The room erupted in applause. People smiled, some dabbed their eyes, touched by the sincerity of his words. But Sundar wasn't watching them. He was watching her husband, and what he saw there was not admiration, it was fury, masked behind a thin smile hidden from everyone else. But not from Sundar. When Sundar returned to his seat, he felt the storm building. The necklace was still gone, tucked away in the man's pocket. Her eyes were filled with silent gratitude but also fear, and Sundar knew something was going to happen before this night ended. The farewell, the hall began to thin as the night drew closer to its end. Laughter softened, footsteps echoed against the marble floors, and tired children clung to their parents as families slowly made their way toward the exits. Yet beneath the fading music and the glow of chandeliers, an undercurrent pulsed. An invisible storm brewing, one that only Sundar and a few others seemed to sense. He sat quietly, his eyes fixed on her. She was surrounded by well-wishers, smiling politely, thanking them, hugging family members with grace. But Sundar had learned to read the space between gestures, the quiet language of a person's heart. And what he saw in her eyes was not celebration, it was endurance. She was enduring the night, wearing her smile like armor, hiding her true feelings under layers of perfection. Her husband hovered nearby, his hand never straying far from her arm, his smile unwavering for the crowd. But every time he leaned close, Sundar noticed the way her body tensed. the way her shoulders stiffened before she relaxed again. It was subtle, invisible to those blinded by joy, but undeniable to anyone looking closely. Sundar's jaw tightened. When the last toast ended and the final goodbyes began, Sundar decided to leave. He had said his words, given his blessing, and seen enough to know that her path was now shadowed by something deeper than anyone else realized. But as he moved toward the exit, a voice stopped him. "Don't leave yet," she whispered. He turned. She stood just a few steps behind him, her gown flowing, her eyes shimmering in the dim light. For the first time all night, her smile slipped completely, leaving only raw truth in her expression. "Walk with me," she said. They slipped out, quietly into the garden, away from the crowd, away from the music. The night was cool, the moonlight washing everything in silver. The silence between them was thick, carrying years of history, regret, and unspoken words. Finally, she broke it. "I heard what you said on stage. Thank you." Her voice trembled. "It meant more than you know." Sundar nodded slowly. "I only spoke the truth. You've always been stronger than you believe." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then why do I feel so weak now?" she whispered. "Why does it feel like I've stepped into something I can't escape?" Sundar's heart ached. He wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her she wasn't alone, but he stopped himself. This wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about giving her the strength to shape her future. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket, but before he could open it, footsteps echoed behind them. Her husband. He stood at the edge of the path, his eyes dark, his smile gone. "So this is what it comes to," he said, his voice low and cutting. "On our wedding night, you sneak away to whisper, 'With him?'" She froze, her tears glistening in the moonlight. Sundar stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "She didn't sneak away. She needed air. I was leaving." The man's jaw clenched. "And what's that in your hand?" Sundar glanced down at the box. His fingers tightened around it, but instead of hiding it, he opened it slowly, revealing the necklace inside. The moonlight caught the silver, making it gleam like a quiet flame. "This," Sundar said softly, "is not about me. It's about her. It always was. It's a reminder of who she is and what she deserves, nothing more." For the first time all night she gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Her eyes filled with recognition, with memories, with the weight of years crashing into this single moment. Her husband scoffed, stepping closer. "She doesn't need your trinkets. She has me now." His voice was sharp, laced with possession. "And she'll learn quickly enough that the past is gone." But Sundar didn't move. His gaze was steady, his voice unwavering. "The past shapes us whether we want it to or not, and sometimes it reminds us of the strength we forget we have." He turned toward her. His words meant only for her now. "Don't ever let anyone take that from you, not even the person standing beside you." Her tears spilled freely, her body trembling. And for a moment, the mask she had worn all evening shattered. She reached for the necklace, her fingers brushing against the charm as though reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost. Her husband stepped back, his face darkening, but the crowd's voices drifted from the hall, interrupting the moment. He straightened quickly, his polished smile snapping back into place, and muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." Then he turned and walked back inside. Sundar remained silent, his heart heavy but calm. He had seen enough to know she would face struggles ahead. But he also knew something else. Tonight she had remembered. She had remembered her strength, her worth, and the truth that no amount of control could erase. She turned to him, holding the necklace close to her chest. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Sundar shook his head gently. "You don't need to. Just promise me one thing. Never forget who you are." Her tears turned into a trembling smile. She nodded, clutching the necklace as if it were a lifeline. When Sundar finally walked away from the hall, the night was still and quiet. He felt no bitterness, no regret. He had not come to reclaim her, nor to fight her battles for her. He had come to say farewell. And in doing so, he had left behind something far greater than himself. A reminder of strength, a symbol of resilience, a gift of freedom she would carry into the uncertain days ahead. As he stepped into the waiting car, the driver asked softly, "Shall I take you home, sir?" Sundar looked out at the fading glow of the hall, at the life he had once shared and finally released. He nodded slowly. "Yes, take me home." The car pulled away, the city lights reflecting in the window as Sundar closed his eyes. And though his heart still carried the ache of the past, it also carried peace. Because tonight he had not just bid farewell to his ex-wife, he had given her something no one could take away. The reminder that even in the darkest moments she was never powerless, and that, more than anything, was what stunned everyone. Because sometimes the greatest love story is not about holding on, but about knowing when to let go.